and unified all of Nepal. For the next few decades, the Kingdom of Gorkha and the British mega-corporation maintained an uneasy peace, but it was only a matter of time before their next clash. In November of 1814, during the reign of King Girvan Yuda Bikram Shah, an escalating frontier dispute led to the second and final showdown between the two powers, the Anglo-Nepalese War. According to historians, the Gorkha army at this time numbered around 12,000 to 14,000 strong. To contend with this force, the East India Company mustered an expedition of over 50,000 men. That the British levied such a massive army in preparation for their push into Nepal displayed just how highly they regarded the fighting skills of their mountain-dwelling opponents, Kinloch's doomed expedition no doubt still fresh in their minds. As expected, the East India Company's advance into the Himalayas was slow, brutal and bloody. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Gorkhali army put up an extremely effective resistance, utilizing the mountainous terrain of their native homeland to stymie the advance of their numerically superior foes. The first major battle of the Anglo-Nepalese War took place at the fortress of Nalapani, where Gorkha captain Balbhadra Kunwar and a garrison of 600 Nepalese men, women and children held the line against British General Rollo Gillespie's force of over 3,500 men. Outnumbered 7-1, Balbhadra withstood the British bombardment for over a month and even managed to kill General Gillespie in action. Throughout the battle, many British soldiers developed a begrudging respect for their lion-hearted enemies, not just for their fighting spirit, but for the honour they displayed in battle. James Bailey Fraser, a Scottish adventurer accompanying Gillespie's division, wrote, "There was here no cruelty to wounded or to prisoners. No poisoned arrows were used. No wells or waters were poisoned. No rancorous spirit of revenge seemed to animate them. They fought us in fair conflict, like men, and in intervals of actual combat, showed us a liberal courtesy worthy of a more enlightened people." The bill the British paid for Nalapani amounted to over 1,000 casualties and the life of an experienced commander. This Pyrrhic victory would set the tone for the rest of the war, in which the East India Company would continue to make slow, incremental and costly advances into Gorkha territory, all the while growing increasingly impressed by the gallant resistance put up by their fearless yet noble enemies. Indeed, the Gorkhas fought on, with seemingly no comprehension of their own mortality. In April of 1815, at the Battle of Duthal, 74-year-old Gorkha general Bakhti Thapa repeatedly threw himself headlong into British cannon fire until he and his warriors had been mown down to the last man. Out of respect for this old man's incredible courage, the British wrapped his body in an expensive shawl and ensured it was returned to his people with due honours. Despite their seemingly inexhaustible font of courage, the Gorkha kingdom was eventually ground down by the British Empire's superior manpower and firepower. In March of 1816, the Anglo-Nepalese War came to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Sogoli, which forced the Kingdom of Gorkha to cede about a fourth of its recently conquered territory to the East India Company, reducing it to the borders that mark present-day Nepal. Although the Nepalese war effort had been a losing one, they had fought fiercely enough to maintain their independence, and would remain a free nation, even as the British extended their rule across the entire rest of the Indian subcontinent. However, while Nepal would not be colonized directly, there was still one further price to be paid for their defiance. Incredibly impressed by the tenacity of the Gorkha soldiers who had fought them so bravely, the British made it a term of the peace that the kings of Gorkha would have to allow British recruiters to roam the Nepalese countryside and encourage their able-bodied warriors to volunteer in the British army. In the British narrative, the creation of the Brigade of Gurkhas is considered an event to be celebrated. Peace had been made with a gallant foe who they had come to respect, and henceforth, Gurkha and Britain would no longer be enemies, but fight side by side as comrades in arms. However, from the Nepalese perspective, this watershed moment is often cast in a more somber light. Tim Gurung, a modern Nepalese writer and Gurkha veteran, claims that the policy of recruiting young Nepalese men into the British army not only took the sting out of the Gorkhali army, but also made the country into a toothless tiger and crippled it for the foreseeable future. By depleting Nepal of its youth and able men for generations, Gurung says, Nepal would never again be able to raise its head against the British. Gurung's words are important to remember. For, as captivating as stories of Gurkha invincibility are, we must remember that, at least originally, they were hired mercenaries serving an imperialist power in colonial wars, often fought to subjugate the homelands of indigenous peoples, and that this has resulted in the Gurkhas having a complex and controversial legacy both in their own homeland and beyond. Indeed, the Gurkhas' reputation among the British public for loyalty and reliability began coming into form during the Great Revolt of 1857, when a massive uprising against the British East India Company erupted across the Indian subcontinent. As some of the only native troops who remained loyal to the British, the Gurkhas played a significant role in putting down the insurrection. From the end of the Great Revolt to the start of World War I, British Gurkha regiments were deployed to fight in colonial wars in Afghanistan, Burma, Tibet and China. Throughout all these campaigns, the Gurkhas slowly cultivated their reputation as some of the most resilient, adaptable and indomitable soldiers in the known world. Throughout the First World War, over 200,000 Gurkhas served in the British Army. They fought with all the discipline and bravery that had come to be expected of them, suffering around 20,000 casualties and receiving almost 2,000 gallantry awards for feats of both individual and regimental heroism. The Gurkhas threw themselves against the Germans in the trenches of Ypres and Loo and bloodied their kukri against the Turks at the meat grinder of Gallipoli, where they were among the first to arrive and the last to leave. Throughout the Second World War, over 250,000 Gurkhas served in almost every theatre of battle, suffering around 32,000 casualties. They fought Hitler's Nazis and Mussolini's fascists in Syria, North Africa, Sicily and Greece, while bloodying the nose of Imperial Japan in Burma and Singapore. Earlier in this video, we told the stories of Lachiman Guru and Tul Bahadur Pun, two Gurkhas whose insane feats of bravery against the Japanese in the Burmese jungle earned them the Victoria Cross. These were just two of a mind-boggling 2,734 bravery awards the Gurkhas earned throughout World War II. After India achieved its independence, the British lost their monopoly on Gurkha invincibility, when some of the Gurkha regiments that had formerly formed part of the British colonial army in India were transferred to the newly independent Indian Army. Meanwhile, in Singapore, a unit of British Army Gurkhas was formed as a riot control and counter-terrorism wing of the local police force in 1949, and played a crucial role in stabilising the city-state in its turbulent road to independence. The Gurkha regiment that remained in the British Army continued to see action in every conflict the United Kingdom took part in. They were in Cyprus in 1974, the Falklands in 1982, participated in the Gulf War of 1991, and were deployed into Afghanistan in 2001. After over 200 years of loyal service to the British Crown, the Gurkhas have undoubtedly been immortalised as some of the modern era's most lionised soldiers, with a reputation of immortality that rivals the ancient Spartans. However, despite being celebrated as heroes by the British public, their relationship with the British government has not been quite as rosy. In retirement, the Gurkhas have long been subject to unequal treatment by their British paymasters, their military pensions only a fraction of what British veterans of equal rank received. Moreover, Gurkha veterans seeking to immigrate and live in the UK, a country they had fought and killed for, faced significant barriers to entry. After decades of protests, the British government agreed in 2007 to start providing pay and pensions on par with British soldiers. Then in 2009, the House of Commons passed a motion allowing all Gurkha veterans the right to residence in the UK. In their home country of Nepal, the Gurkhas are considered in some circles to be a source of national shame, a consistent drain on the country's best and brightest, and a major contributor to economic stagnation back home. However, despite the controversies, many in Nepal hold the Gurkhas in high regard, and take pride in the reputation for fearlessness and invincibility they have earned for the Nepalese people on the world stage. Thus it seems that for the foreseeable future, young men throughout Nepal will continue to enlist in foreign Gurkha brigades, where they will cultivate themselves into some of the physically and mentally toughest people on the planet, living up to the legacy of their Gurkha fathers and grandfathers as the fiercest soldiers of the modern age. More videos on history's deadliest warriors are on the way. To ensure you don't miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video.